You ever get punished over something so small, it almost feels like a joke until it ruins everything? That's exactly what happened to me. $19, not 90, not 900, just 19. That's all it took for the company. I gave 3 years of my life, 2 late nights, weekends, skipped vacations to toss me out like I never mattered. No warning, no explanation. Just a cold email from HR saying I violated policy and my services were no longer required. But here's the part they didn't expect: firing me over that petty amount. That was their biggest mistake, because they didn't just fire me, they woke me up. They pushed the wrong person. I wasn't going to go quietly, and I definitely wasn't going to let that humiliation sit. They forgot one little detail. I knew their clients better than they did. I had built the trust. I'd fixed their mess-ups, smoothed over their delays, and held their hand through every crisis. And the vendors. I was the one they called. Not the CEO. I was the actual bridge between the company and the people who kept it running. So I made a decision. If they could treat loyalty like trash over $19, I'd show them what that kind of disrespect really costs. But don't get it twisted, didn't break any laws. No dirty tricks. I just used what I already knew and let the truth speak louder than anything else. It started with one phone call, then another. And before long, things began to shift. But I'll save the details for what happened next in just a moment. Because what unfolded wasn't just about business, became personal. And by the time it was over, they didn't just lose a former employee. They lost far more than they ever imagined. Let me take you back a bit, just so you understand how ridiculous this whole thing really was. I worked for a mid-sized consulting firm, the kind that always claimed to be like family, but treated people like disposable tools the moment it was convenient. I was in account management, handling some of the company's most valuable clients. I wasn't just doing my job, I was fixing other people's mess-ups, managing vendor relationships, even helping out the sales team when deals were slipping. I was the go-to person. They knew it, I knew it, and I honestly thought that meant something. That $19 issue. It wasn't even a purchase I made. One of the junior team members used my company card for a client lunch, something we did all the time. It just didn't get logged properly into the expense software. I even flagged it the same week and followed up, but still, they used it. They labeled it misuse of company funds. It felt like they were looking for a reason to cut costs, and I was an easy target. Quiet, reliable, low maintenance till that day. But here's what they didn't calculate. I wasn't just sitting at a desk, I was in meetings with CEOs. I understood each client's pain points, their goals, their frustrations with our internal processes. They confided in me, trusted me. Same with our vendors, many of them had my personal number. I wasn't just another employee, I was the thread keeping things together. And when they cut me out over a technicality, it created ripples they never saw coming. What they also didn't realize, I didn't need a company name to solve problems. My reputation was stronger than their brand. The moment I left, people started asking questions, and some of those questions turned into opportunities I never saw coming. But that's where things started to shift quietly. Then suddenly, a few days after they fired me, I was still sitting with that numb, burning feeling. I kept replaying it in my head, the final Zoom call, the HR tone so robotic it almost made me laugh. No apology, no discussion. Just, this concludes your employment. I didn't even get a proper goodbye. But while they thought I'd disappear, quietly, I was already receiving LinkedIn messages and texts from clients asking, "What happened? And are you okay?" One even said, "Without you, we don't trust them to handle our account." That's when something clicked. I wasn't just an employee. They had built their entire client experience around me, and now they had to face that reality. but I didn't reply right away. I stayed quiet and just observed. Meanwhile, inside the company, chaos was brewing. A former coworker who still liked me slipped me a message saying vendors were threatening to walk. Deadlines were getting missed. Meetings were being canceled or rescheduled with flimsy excuses. Apparently, the new person handling my accounts had no idea what they were doing. I wasn't surprised. One of the clients, an old-school logistics firm I'd worked with for years, invited me to lunch. Not as a consultant, just as a friend. But midway through the conversation, he leaned in and said, "You know, we're looking for someone to handle strategy outside that firm. You ever think about going solo?" And that's when things started to shift again. Suddenly, I wasn't just reacting, I was thinking ahead, quietly planning. Connecting dots I hadn't paid attention to before. But this wasn't just about clients. There was something else happening behind the scenes. A former vendor hinted that my firing might not have been about the $19 at all, that someone higher up had a reason to push me out. And once I started looking into that, what I found made everything 10 times more personal. That vendor's words stuck with me. It wasn't about the $19. At first, I brushed it off, thinking maybe it was just office politics or someone covering up incompetence. But then I remembered something. About a month before I got fired, I'd raised concerns in a leadership meeting about shady invoicing practices. Nothing dramatic, just inconsistencies I spotted while reconciling vendor payments. I flagged them internally, thinking I was doing the responsible thing. But the room had gone weirdly silent when I brought it up. The CFO barely acknowledged it, and the conversation quickly shifted. At the time, I didn't think much of it. Now, it felt different. I started connecting the dots. My expense report got flagged right after that meeting, and only mine. Not the others who routinely forgot to file or went way over the budget on lunches. It started to feel deliberate, targeted, like I had unknowingly touched something they didn't want exposed. I didn't have proof, not yet, but I did have names, email threads, dates. I started going back through old messages, piecing together who was in what meeting, which accounts got reassigned, who approved what payment. And I noticed something else, a pattern in how certain vendors got fast-tracked while others were constantly delayed. And the ones being prioritized, they all seemed connected to one executive, quietly, indirectly, but it was there. Meanwhile, on the outside, things were moving fast. Word had spread that I was available. 3 of my former clients set up meetings with me within the same week. They said they were exploring options, but I knew what they really meant. They were ready to jump ship. The company was scrambling, trying to hold it all together, but the cracks were widening. Still, I kept my head down and played it smart. No drama, no loud announcements, just quiet moves, strategic conversations. And all the while, I was preparing something bigger, something that would not only expose what really happened, but would shift the entire balance of trust and power. I just needed one more piece, and I was getting closer, just when I thought I had a grip on what was really going on. Something unexpected hit me like a freight train. I was scrolling through my personal email one night, completely routine stuff, when I noticed a notification from an old shared drive I hadn't touched in months. It was from a folder we used back when I was leading a cross-functional project. I had long since moved on, assuming everything had been shut down after I left. But someone from inside the company had just tried to access it. And the strange part, they didn't have permission. The system auto-blocked them, and I got the alert because I was still listed as the original owner. That folder. It didn't contain anything sensitive at the time. But now, seeing someone try to sneak into it, I wondered, what were they looking for? I opened it. Buried deep were early drafts of budget files, vendor proposal comparisons, and raw internal feedback I'd collected from clients. Stuff that would look messy to the wrong eyes, but more importantly, stuff that could expose how disorganized and reactive upper management really was behind the curtain. No filters, no polished reports, just raw, real data. Maybe that was what someone didn't want others to see, and then it hit me, maybe my firing wasn't just personal or political. Maybe it was protective. A move to wipe out the one person who could tie the loose ends together. The timing made too much sense now. That leadership meeting where I asked too many questions, the audit I suggested, and they quietly shut down. The vendors that suddenly got bumped to top priority. It was all part of a much larger cover-up. And now, knowing I still had access to data they thought was buried, that made me dangerous. Not just to the people who fired me, but to the entire image they'd spent years building. I knew now that I wasn't just pushed out. I was erased before I could connect the last few dots. But they weren't counting on one thing, that I still had one move left. And it was almost time to use it. It all came to a head one Monday morning. I had spent the entire weekend organizing files, emails, eyelines, everything that connected the dots between the shady vendor deals. The fake expense excuse and the exec who'd been quietly redirecting contracts to companies linked to his cousin's firm. I didn't want revenge, I wanted the truth out. And I wanted my name cleared, so I did what they never expected. I didn't go to a lawyer. I didn't post anything online. Instead, I reached out directly to two of the company's biggest clients. Ones I had personally managed for years, and scheduled a quiet meeting. I showed them everything, every discrepancy, every flagged payment, every decision that had been hidden from their view. They weren't just shocked, they were furious. These weren't just clients, they were partners. And being lied to didn't sit well with them. That same week, one of the vendors also came forward. Turns out, they had been pressured into accepting late payments and cutting corners, all while being promised future opportunities. They'd kept quiet, afraid of losing the contract. But once they saw I was speaking up, they decided they weren't going to be used anymore either. One by one, the house of cards started to shake. By Friday, I got word that the executive behind it all was placed on leave pending an internal investigation. A client canceled their renewal. Another shifted part of their business to my newly registered consulting firm and the company. They issued a quiet press statement about internal restructuring. Hoping no one would dig deeper, I thought that was the end of it. I was finally free, my name cleared, and my new business growing faster than I imagined. But just as I was settling into this new chapter, I got a message from someone I never expected, another former employee. They had their own story. What they revealed. It made my $19 look like just the beginning. The message came late at night, almost lost in a pile of notifications. It was from Carla, someone I hadn't spoken to in over a year. She'd worked in finance, quiet, sharp, always the last to leave. Her message was short. Hey, just saw what happened. I think we need to talk. I was pushed out too. And I. Know why? We met at a small cafe the next morning. Carla brought a folder with her, not digital, old school. Inside were copies of internal emails, spreadsheet printouts, and budget approval forms from nearly a year ago. And it all pointed to the same executive who had orchestrated my exit. Turns out, Carla had flagged irregularities in vendor payouts long before I ever noticed them. But instead of being heard, she was quietly reassigned to a meaningless role. Her access restricted, and within months, she was let go in a round of budget cuts. We sat there for nearly 2 hours, comparing notes, dates, stories. It became clear my firing over $19 wasn't a one-off. It was a pattern. Every employee who got too close to the truth was removed with some excuse. Carla had held on to everything, unsure of what to do with it. Now, with me already making noise, she felt safe to share. Together, we compiled the timeline and submitted it anonymously to a journalist who had covered corporate accountability before. A few weeks later, an article dropped. The headline wasn't dramatic, but it hit hard. Whistleblowers expose internal corruption at mid-sized consulting firm. The story laid out everything: vendor manipulation, employee retaliation, and unethical business practices. It didn't name me or Carla directly, but anyone in the industry could read between the lines. The fallout was immediate. The executive resigned. A full audit was launched. More former employees came forward. I got messages from strangers saying thank you. Clients who'd once ghosted me now reached out, asking how we could work together. The consulting firm tried to salvage their image, but the trust was broken. And in that industry, trust is everything. As for me, I never planned on building a business out of all this. But word of mouth spread faster than I could have imagined. My new consulting firm grew, not because I had some huge ad budget, but because people remembered how I treated them when I was just the account manager. They respected how I handled the storm. Quietly, steadily, with integrity. The $19 that started it all. I kept the receipt, not out of bitterness, but as a reminder. It wasn't about the money, it never was. It was about how people are treated when no one thinks they're watching. I learned that sometimes what feels like the end is really just the beginning. So if you've ever been undervalued, blamed, or dismissed, remember this: they might take your job, your title, even your reputation for a while. But if you hold on to your truth, your relationships, and your self-worth, you'll come out stronger. That $19 cost them everything.